And as Lauren said, I actually make my living as a photographer. I was actually born in Albany, though I grew up in California. Why I tell you that, I am technically genetically a New Yorker, so I talk like one. My guess is roughly 1/3 of you at the end of this group, at the end of the class, will walk out and say, I think I might be able to do that if I really, really concentrate hard. Good for you. 1/3 of you will walk out and say, why would I want to take this thing that I love so much and ruin it by doing all that? Which is a great decision. And 1/3 of you will say, I'm not sure yet, so I need to hear somebody else. And that's a really important thing we were discussing a minute ago. Not every, but many of the presenters who come here talk about some of the same things, and each person has a different strategy. So if you're really serious about the I may want to do this when I grow up question, the more people you can hear answering some of the same questions, the more likely you are to actually get the information you want to decide whether you are going to or not. So the class is called A Week in the Life of a Professional Editorial Photographer. How many of you are thinking, oh, why am I paying attention? I don't want to do editorial, I want to do portraits, or I want to do landscapes, or I want to do something else. To some degree, that doesn't mean anything. I just happen to make my living as an editorial photographer, meaning I make pictures for publication. 90% of what I'm going to talk about is things like workflow and marketing, long-term planning, cost-benefit analysis, all sorts of stuff that's relevant to any kind of photography. So don't get too hung up on the kind of work I do as much as the process and the tools. And the trick, of course, is I'm going to compress 7 days into 2 hours by talking very fast. So I'm going to go take you through a series of questions that I think you should ask every professional photographer. This is the one you all want to know, right? How do you get paid what you want to do with photography, and what are your revenue streams? And I'm going to talk a lot about this idea of revenue streams. We're not going to talk too much about art today. It's mostly about making a living. Another question, what was your career path? What was the process as you went from there to here? Because that's the question you all want to know, is why is he standing up front, jabbering away and getting paid, and why am I sitting here listening to him? And it's a good question. What it is you want to say with your photographs, and how do you actually get your photographs to do that? That's a perennial challenge for all of us. I'm still struggling with that one. What motivates you to continue taking pictures economically, politically, emotionally, intellectually? This is the most important question of all today, and I'll come back to this 3 or 4 times today because it's really, really important. This goes to that question of, do you want to take this thing you love and do it for money? What gets you out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning? So I'm going to talk about and answer this, and I hope by doing that, begin to give you some things to think about for yourself. What technology gear do you use to solve the problems you're presented with as a photographer, and why do you use that gear? Olympus does sponsor me. I was using Olympus gear before they sponsored me. I'll probably use Olympus gear even if they stop sponsoring me, because it solves my problem. And I'll talk later about the idea that a camera solves a problem. That's all a camera does. And the problem usually is there's something in front of you and you've got to get it on the chip, the film, the paper. So I'll explain why I use what I do. Which photographers influence you, and how do they influence your thinking and photographing and your career path? Why do we look at other people's work?
To get a feel of where you want to go.
That's right.
I mean, if you don't like landscape and you know it, and you have passion for people, then you do that.
Great. Okay, so it helps you in deciding what you don't want to do. That's a very important thing. That's one.
It's a way to compress experience. You don't have to go out and experience 30,000 things. You get to go through.
Right. Both of those things are that exact idea. You don't necessarily have to do it to understand it. The way I describe it, and they go to both of those things, is that you have, if you look at other people's work, you've seen how they photograph the thing that they photographed, and how do they get it from what was in front of them, typically 3-dimensionally, onto the chip, film, or paper 2-dimensionally. So I look at a lot of photographs. I actually have a college degree in the history of photography. So for me, the 3 most influential photographers I was interested in are W. Gene Smith, Harry Callahan, and David Burnett, who's actually a working photographer. And because I have a degree in history photography, I really say all photographers, and I strongly, strongly encourage you to look at other people's work. Alex Soth, everybody know who Alex Soth is? Alex Soth said his contribution, and I'm waiting to make my contribution so people will quote me 20 years from now, but his contribution was, photography is a language. And like any language, you have to speak it and practice it a lot to get good at it. So why in the world would this be any different? And similarly, you have to look at how everybody else practices it, speaks it, or in the case of photography, does it, so you can understand the language. And I think he's really got a point there. So I look at a lot of work. I encourage you to look at a lot of work. I love photography. I get the impression most of you do too. But do you want to take it and do it on command for money for strangers. This is one of those points where some of you are going to say, you know, he's got a really good point. I think I'm just going to stick. And that's a great decision. I promise I will show you pictures, and I will show you other stuff. But I want to frame this discussion in sort of a larger thinking point. Gould's paradox. A paleontologist named Stephen Jay Gould found that as more of the population approaches the limits of the human body's capabilities, the distance between the normal and stellar physical specimens diminishes. In baseball, that means while batting averages have gone up, they end up clumped together in the middle with fewer extremes. The standardization of equipment closes the gap between the average player and the superstar. And you know this from the Olympics. When somebody wins a gold medal, they win by a tenth of a second or 100th of a second. So they're not that much better. In our case, why would that not mean that as skill levels have gone up, they end up clumped together in the middle with fewer extremes? The standardization of equipment, especially in the case of digital, closes the gap between the average photographer and the superstar. And so when you see somebody else's work and you say, I could have done that, you probably could have. But they did something, sometimes a very small thing, to get from there to here, networking, any of the things I'm going to talk about in the next hour and a half, they did that you didn't. And you need to be paying attention to those things, because those are really the pivotal things you should be paying attention to. And then I'm going to circle back now. How do you get paid to do what you want to do with your photography? What are your revenue streams? So my revenue streams, and everybody gets their pens out because this becomes important. Assignment work, stock image licensing, workshop teaching, fine art print sales, grants and fellowships, and private teaching. And to keep you awake for the next hour and a half, I'm not going to tell you my pricing strategies until towards the end of the talk. But I will go over my pricing strategies on all of those. But those are all the things that I do to make a living. And I have to tell you, assignment work is slowly migrating. They're in a percentage of business. I'm doing less and less assignment work, and my stock licensing is going up more. The rest of them aren't nearly as much money, but they become part of it. And when I talk about the pricing strategies, you'll understand more about how they overlap. What was your career path? Exactly the process that you went through to get from there to here. It goes all the way back to there. Which one am I? On the right. You are correct. The little butterball is my brother, who's now taller than I am. I grew up in suburban Los Angeles. Smog, cars, freeways. I had a really excellent high school photography teacher who gave me the photo 1 assignment, go out and play with light and shadows, and then I used to get on the buses in Los Angeles and take journeys and make pictures like this. I was in the high school photography club, sad but true. I went to college in Claremont. My hair was a nicer color then, wasn't it? I used to have a chin, too. And I studied the history of photography, as I talked about before. And so every week when I would study a new photographer, I was actually trying on the work of a different photographer. This week, can you guess who I am? I'm Dwayne Michaels, who did sequences and self-portraits. I'm Bill Brandt, British photographer. I think it was Gary Winogrand that week. I'm being sarcastic, but you get the idea. This week I was Irving Penn, if you know his still lives. And my photographs, and I think almost all photographs, are a balancing act between the formal, something like this with a lot of really, nice colors and shapes, and the informational. It's the same picture. And we won't talk about the idiot who drove their Jaguar under a school bus in Rockefeller Center in the late 70s, but graduated with a degree in history of photography, spent 3 months writing numbers on the back of photos in museums, and realized I was bored out of my mind. And luckily, this guy was running for president based in Southern California, so I spent a lot of time chasing him. And I got this photo of him, which ran in the New York Times fashion page. This is a historical photo. Do you know why it's a historical photo?
Casual clothes.
First photo of an American president wearing blue jeans, apparently. Okay? Now, everybody jokes about you never should get propeller rotors growing out of people's heads. I actually got the rotor from a helicopter growing out of the president-elect of the United States. Composition failure 101. So, I realized I knew nothing, stepped back, started working at a small-town suburban newspaper in Los Angeles called the Daily Signal, where I did things like chasing traffic accidents, kid's first haircut, listening to the police radio for things like auto versus swimming pool. I'd never heard that call before, so you got to go just to see exactly what does auto versus swimming pool look like. This guy's going to recur through my work. Those of you of a certain age may not know who he is. Or the other way around, maybe. So at the time I was working in Southern California, I met a woman who was going to graduate school in Los Angeles, and that she was going to finish her graduate school in New York. So now I've got the problem I need to get from California to New York, and I made it to Fort Worth, Texas, halfway across. You can see how happy I am to be there. But what I did in Fort Worth is I did my first in-depth photo essay. I got in trouble with the police a lot, but what I did that really matters in terms of my journey, and the whole point of this is how do you get from the I want to take pictures to I have something that I can offer the end user that somebody else can't do, to go back to Gould's paradox. We'll say it right now. It's a very difficult market out there right now. Unless you're going to be really, really aggressive and really, really focused, you're not likely to survive. And the only thing that's going to differentiate you is some skill set. My skill set is in-depth photo essays, and I'm going to take you through the process of how I learned how to do them. This is the first one, homeless family living in a school bus outside Fort Worth, Texas. It was reused later by a magazine in Japan. Didn't particularly like Texas. I don't think Texas liked me. So now I've moved further. I'm in Syracuse, New York, so at least I'm in the same time zone as the woman in question, though I'm mangier than before. And I did my second in-depth story while I was in Syracuse, New York. I followed 4 young men through the Marine Corps together. There's a guy named Matt Ware, this is his girlfriend at the time, saying goodbye at the airport. He's going to go off to South Carolina and become a Marine. This is them on the plane with his best friend Greg Fisher. The plane takes off, your stomach drops out. I'm sitting in a plane backwards, blasting off electronic flash in like 83 or 84. Can you say air marshal? So, then they didn't care, but things have changed. Gets his head shaved off, and this is a very compressed version of a very long story. Came back, they're actually married. He's a policeman in upstate New York now. But it ran in the Syracuse Herald Journal, the newspaper I was working for, and it got republished a whole bunch of times. This is a French magazine that used it. So more of the same. And when I was living in Syracuse, New York, and by the time we started photography in 72 in high school, 79 graduated from college. We're up to 83 now, and I'm doing a commuting deal between Syracuse, New York, and New York City. People Express, how many of you are old enough to remember People Express? $19 between Syracuse and you get to the worst terminal at Newark Airport, but it was cheap. So I'd fly down every weekend, spend Monday with the woman in question. Sunday with the woman in question. Monday I'd show my portfolio, and then Tuesday I'd go back, and did that for 2 years. And I was initially doing it to be able to take the trips off my taxes. But at the end, when I finally decided that newspapers were not for me, I sent out this photo as my announcement says, I'm in New York, and I had to work on the 3rd day that I was in New York City. And anybody who freelances will tell you the first year will kill you, okay? So if you're serious about this is another one of those write it down or think about it. All right, so I want to be freelance in 5 years. Between now and then, what am I going to do to build up so when I do quit my job and I go to do this full time, everybody knows me? I wish I was smart enough to say this was intentional. It's complete dumb luck, but it worked very well. Spent 2 years living in New York City on 23rd between 9th and 10th, Lincoln Terrace, Lincoln Towers, great building. Who did I? All the photo editors that I had met on all those trips when I was coming down every weekend, because this is in the old days when you could call up the photo editor Time magazine. The first time you have to leave them a printed something. The second time they actually look at it. The third time they say they'll meet with you. And the fourth time they actually return your phone calls. But in a 2-year cycle, I was able to do all that. And so then I'm sending this promo and saying, I'm now in New York City. Now, of course, the thing of simply being in New York City is not enough. You'd have to have more to what you're presenting yourself as, but that was my step there.
You have a Canon. You have a Canon.
At this point in time, I have Canon cameras. That is correct. Photographed this guy. He had a job before he was on Sex and the City. When it ran in the LA Times, which is who assigned me to do this, my mother called me up and she said, oh, that's what you do for a living. You photograph really good-looking Russian men. From a store and winery in upstate New York. Doing an annual report. I'm down in Louisiana with an assistant in a helicopter. Used to do a lot of work for these people. Same story. And then after 2 years in New York City, moved to Philadelphia. Married the woman in question. We moved to Philadelphia because she got a job there. I'm self-employed. I can work anywhere. Doing stories for magazines like this, Mid-Atlantic Country, on a music school. Same music school story. A college outside of Philadelphia. Started doing more and more work overseas. This is a story on pearl processing in India. And in Philadelphia, I used to do, and this is really when I was sort of hitting my stride doing what I wanted to do, is I would do in-depth photo stories for the Philadelphia Inquirer's Sunday magazine, which when it was published, and is not even published anymore, and if you read about the fate of newspapers today, a lot of that's changed, but they used to do in-depth photo stories in their Sunday magazine. And I got into this rhythm where I'd spend a couple days a week over 6 months doing a story for them, and then I would send a stack of the magazines to my agent in New York, up on 79th Street at the time, though she's dead now, sadly. She would send the magazines all over the world, and people would buy the same story over and over. So this is a story in a yeshiva, a school for boys in Philadelphia. Why am I photographing a yeshiva in color? Because everybody photographs Orthodox Jews in black and white. That's why. And I wanted to do it in color. And then the other thing that I had, and this goes back to what I started with, I spent 2 weeks in a yeshiva like this in Israel when I was 18. And so, not that I could hardly say I was religious or observant, but I just could speak enough and be respectful and sort of get into the culture that I had an advantage over the rest of my peers. And those kinds of things are ever more important these days. What is it you can bring that somebody else can't? And this is how it was used in the Philadelphia Inquirer Sunday magazine, and then subsequently reused around the world. So we're getting now to the point, and I did 16 stories over 10 years for the Philadelphia Inquirer Sunday magazine, and at that point in time, the contract was really good. They used it once. I owned the work. I could reuse it as much as I want. There was real money to be made. But I was really getting to the point now, what does I really want to do with my photographs, and how do I actually get my photographs to do that? And the yeshiva story was fun, and I did a bunch of other stories for them, but those were kind of tune-ups to the next 2 stories, which are the things that to me, are closest to what I want to do. This is a story on the pesticide poisoning of farm workers in the Central Valley of California. The woman at the left is what's called a flagger. She uses a flashlight to tell the plane where to start and stop spraying. And the story is about agricultural chemicals in the air and the water, and unfortunately about how they affect children especially. This is what's called trimming. They start to spray the fields before they enter in order to get the corners. One of the things that results from the use of pesticides in these agricultural areas is elevated incidences of childhood cancer and birth defects. A woman named Sophia Buentello, she visits the grave of her granddaughter every Saturday morning, and we're driving home afterwards. Laura Gonzalez receiving chemotherapy. She was not contagious, but that's her younger brother who was afraid to be in the same room with her because she lost her hair. Oops, sorry. And the other thing I saw is this kind of birth defect. It's called limb reduction defect, is a technical name. And there's higher incidences of limb reduction defect in areas where pesticides are used. His name is Felipe Franco. He might be cracking 40 now. He's developmentally perfectly normal. He'll live till 80 or 90 like anybody else. My attempt at a crucifix metaphor for the farm workers population. This was funded by a grant from Nikon. You've heard of them? They make, all right. Sadly, a couple years ago, they stopped giving out the Nikon grant, but the Nikon grant, I think they may have had 15 of them over a decade and a half, supported photographers to do in-depth projects. And I did this story on pesticide poisoning of farm workers in the Central Valley, and then it was resold many, many places afterwards. Can we hold the questions only just, I promise I'll get to them at the end, okay? Or the best thing is probably write them down because I know I'll forget. So it was reused. I think I've got some reuses here, I believe. Yeah, this is how it was used in the Philadelphia Inquirer Sunday magazine, California magazine, Self magazine. And it was so, I don't know, successful is the wrong word, but it told an important story. The Inquirer then said, okay, do the exact same story in New Jersey. So this is the story that I did for them on pesticide use in New Jersey, from the same story. And then somebody said, we love the California story so much, go back and shoot the entire thing in color. I said, sure, you're talking about a lot of money there. They said, shoot the whole thing in color. This is back in the 90s when people had money, so. So that was the first really serious, in-depth story that goes to that question of what do I want to say with my photographs and why. This is the next one that does that same kind of thing. It's on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And like with the pesticide story, the real question is, what can I say about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that hasn't already been said? And so this is typically the magazine cover to kind of set up. You've got an Israeli, you've got a Palestinian. Israelis on a bus, Palestinians throwing stones, damaging the windows. Israeli soldier watching Palestinians come out of Friday prayers. Checkpoint from overhead. And what I discovered, and I worked on this project initially on my own, and then eventually I was fortunate enough to get a grant, was not only did I, of course, photograph the conflict, because that's unfortunately the sort of defining part of the relationship, but I also photographed coexistence and cooperation with the idea, and this was my experience during the time I was there working on this project, that all three of those things go on more or less simultaneously. So now we're moving from conflict into coexistence. A mixed livestock market, a mixed school program, shopping side by side, and a mixed rally for peace. And this is not a class on grants and project funding, though I do a class once a year, give or take a bit, on grants and project funding, where I go into this one into much more detail. And I won't today, except to say that I worked on it for about 6 months, starting with the conflict, did a lot of stuff on cooperation, and then ended up filling in the middle of conflict, coexistence, and cooperation. And then I applied for a grant from the MacArthur Foundation. You've heard of the MacArthur Foundation? They have their Genius Grants. I didn't get a Genius Grant. I got a very intelligent grant, but I didn't get a Genius Grant. They used to, and they don't anymore. I have this thing, I apply for things, I get the grants, and then they stop doing them. They used to have a great program called Research and Writing on International Peace and Cooperation. And why I mentioned that, and what was so important about this grant, was that they understood that what I was bringing to this project was expertise. Well, I was different than everybody else. I had something that they couldn't get from somebody else. And it wasn't about photography, it was about subject matter expertise, which is, again, one of these, what are you going to do to differentiate yourself from the next guy questions. It was used by the Philadelphia Inquirer Sunday magazine and by the Pennsylvania Gazette. I ended up covering the first Gulf War for Life magazine as part of this project, testing out gas masks on kids before the first Gulf War. And then it spun off to do a number of subsequent stories. This was the story on the settlers in the West Bank. I spent 7 days with Yasser Arafat, which really meant that I spent 7 days outside of his office and 10 minutes with him, and then a day outside, and then I started doing more and more corporate work and annual report work to pay for these projects as well. Again, that idea that the people that I work for can see these kinds of stories and say, okay, we're laying a gas pipeline in western Pennsylvania. Can you use that same storytelling technique to do the stories that we need told? Also in Gulf of Mexico, more of the same. Then I had a daughter who's now 19, and I just worry about the day she's sitting out in the audience and howls when this picture comes up. Sadly, my first marriage didn't last. Subsequently remarried. My second wife is from India. My daughter's getting older. We have a little grayscale here from middle gray to pink to very light. And because my wife is from India, I've been doing a lot of work for the last decade or so photographing the impact of globalization in India. And I'm going to go through this really quickly. This is a talk in itself. But what I'm trying to get at is, number one, this career path thing, but also finding the 4 or 5 things that I can do that somebody else can't do. Because for years and years, I was considered an expert in the Middle East. I'm now considered an expert in South Asia. Whether or not I'm so brilliant is debatable, but I spend so much time there, I'm able to photograph there, and I understand it differently than most people. That's what differentiates me. And to go back to what's going to make you succeed, what is the thing that you have that somebody else doesn't have? People ask me, do you set up your photographs? I'm not smart enough to say, let's hire 2 guys to drive a monitor around Bangalore on a scooter. I'm also not smart enough to say to a guy, hey, will you construct a sidewalk in front of that great sign? And the way that this was paid for was a combination of 2 Fulbright fellowships, which came from your tax dollars. It was very kind of you to send me to India to teach photojournalism. And from a fellowship from the Alicia Patterson Foundation. Alicia Patterson was the founder of Newsday. You've heard of that newspaper out in Long Island? Yeah. When she passed, her family, the shares that I guess her family held were put into a trust, and they started a foundation to support journalists to do projects of their own design and research. This is from my Alicia Patterson project. This guy is named Venkatesh. He's statistically the bottom end of the Indian middle class. He's got enough money that he can send his kid to a private school rather than the overcrowded public school, so his kid's in a school uniform. He's in traditional dress. From another piece for the Alicia Patterson Foundation on changing roles of women. Single-sex staff at a police station. Another article for the Alicia Patterson was on the gateways of globalization. How does globalization move back and forth? One way that globalization moves back and forth is Australian fashion photographers marry Indian fashion models. A woman who came from New York to study yoga in India, so it's much more of a two-way street than people think. And then the last piece I had to do for the Alicia Patterson Foundation was on the losers in globalization, trying to highlight the digital divide, internet, cafe, and train station. One of our finer cultural exports to India, Fridays. Building McMansions in a country where many people don't have decent housing. And this next photo is a little rough. It's the worst example of all the things that I saw during the time I was working on the Globalization project, which is called a dowry burning. Dowry burnings happen in some but not all sub-communities within India where, let me get this right because I don't want to say this wrong. The groom or the groom's family demand of the bride or the bride's family during or right after the wedding, and increasingly the demand for dowries, the figure of the dowry, and the resulting dowry deaths or dowry burnings, which is what this is, unfortunately, that result when those dowry demands are not met, have been going up with the arrival of globalization in India. And so that's like, for me, that was the most difficult thing of all that I saw in terms of the downsides of globalization in India. So, you still with me? So what motivates you to continue taking pictures economically, politically, intellectually, or emotionally? Like I promised you I was going to come back to this before. I'm very lucky. I'm pretty good organization-wise, and you'll see the organization part more towards the end. So more by organizational skill than brilliant intent, I solved the economic thing. I just took you through the political thing. I'm going to do a little bit more a little later on the intellectual thing. And there's a sort of an emotional thing that I love about photography, which is I love more than anything else getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, going out somewhere where I haven't been, and having little adventures. Those are the 2 things that I like the most. I like trying to understand some issue intellectually or politically, which we just did, or having what I call little adventures. And I'm going to show you some of the results of my adventures here in a minute. But what I'm getting at is that if you're going to do this professionally, you need to keep saying, what are the things that I care about the most, that I can, of course, convince other people to pay me, but I can do with such passion that I'm going to be the best at. One of the things that I'm the best at is I do a lot of what I called, No, I just put this in today. This is me at work a couple days ago photographing for a project that I'm in the middle of and I'm going to talk about in just a bit. I've been photographing inside foreclosed houses for a project I call Foreclosed Dreams. The idea is that with the foreclosure crisis, the American dream of the home is getting eroded at best. And so this is some stuff I just did in Sutton, Mass on Thursday. And I made a little one-minute video, first me photographing, and then these are the end results. So this is another one of those. This is something I care about. I'm trying to understand it. I don't know if I could ever fully understand the foreclosure crisis, but it's my way of pulling it apart and kind of trying to understand it. And that's me at work. And these are a few more photographs from that. This is in California, also in California, Michigan. And I like to photograph in the time in between when the houses are foreclosed and before they're cleaned up, because that's when I can see what I think of as the ghosts of the people who live there. Back in San Francisco, Stockton, California, Los Angeles, Providence, Rhode Island, back in California, and Connecticut. I'm not smart enough to carry around an American flag and stick it in the towel rack of a. So, I mean, this is what I was thinking about this as I was putting the presentation on together on the train. I walked in this room and I said, oh my. I mean, you just have to feel for these people because. So, what I'm getting at is this, and again, this is not the grants class, so I'm not going to go too far off on this, but there's only a few things that I do really, really well, and the people that I work for know that I do a few things well. There's many things. I don't do any fashion. I didn't do any sports. I'm a dreadful wedding photographer, world's worst portrait photographer. There's a couple things that I do well. These are those, and by playing to my strengths and putting all the other stuff aside, I have a much better chance of moving forward in the market, and I'm putting that out there with that idea in mind. But I'm also going to try to teach you one more lesson right now. And the question is, can any of you help me access foreclosures and photograph anywhere in the US? The other thing that's changed tremendously since I was a young photographer is the whole thing about networking, social media, all that stuff. It used to be there weren't many of us who could do it, so there was a skill thing that I had that most of you didn't have. Technology has negated that thing. It's destroyed that. So the whole thing that you read about all the other businesses about how networking is the key thing, networking's the key thing. So, if anybody wants to win the prize, and there is a prize, come talk to me afterwards if you can help me access foreclosures to photograph anywhere in the US. Seriously, by the way, I'm quite serious about that. It's both a lesson in networking and it could make my day particularly pleasant. All right. You saw my little multimedia piece. Why do you all need to know about multimedia?
It's the way it is.
It's the way it is. The future of photography, does everybody know the future of photography? Well, more specifically, as a friend of mine describes it, it's a YouTube window. It's that. Whether it was YouTube, Vimeo, doesn't matter. Animoto, it's that. And it's a big change for those of us who've been doing it a long time because the past was vertical. Magazines were vertical, okay? The internet is horizontal. It's still a problem for me. I shoot too many verticals because I'm used to doing verticals. But I'm going to show you two relatively short multimedia pieces. I hope you like them. That's not why I'm showing them to you. I'm showing them to you because, again, I'm developing a set of skills that most, and I don't know all of you that well, most of you probably don't have. And if you want to do this, you're going to have to think about developing those skills. Again, step back and don't think about them as editorial stuff because if you know everybody know what Animoto is? It's a service mostly for wedding and portrait photographers where you can make little videos and little slideshows for your clients. I say that because they're doing much of what I'm going to show you, but it's a portrait, wedding, family market rather than editorial market. So I'm trying to keep getting this emphasis of don't think, oh, he's an editorial photographer, that doesn't apply to me. It does apply to you. Because the future people who will part with money, they're all going to want to be able to put them on the web, or frankly, they're going to want to put them on their iPhones, which is a whole other thing in terms of the quality question. So we're going to run these two pieces. They're not that long. I'm hoping the audio is going to work well.
My name is Shamina Taliar Khan. I own Shamiz Embroideries in New York, and we do embroideries for most of the designers in the world, in Milan, in Paris, and in New York. It's mainly evening wear, and it's all made in India and sold all over the world. We create designs every season for the various designers. And after their approval, and they send us paper patterns, and after that we make the dresses that go on the runway. Feroz, क्या हो गया वो पीस? इवेंजेलिन ड्रेस का जो तुमको प्रोडक्शन दिया है करने को 20 सेट का, उसका क्या स्टोरी है तुम्हारा? ब्यूटी आर्ट में बहुत तकलीफ दिया मेरे को। 750 मीटर उनके पास से बिल कर दिया तो मेरे को उसके पास ही करना पड़ा इस टाइम।
इधर आ
मुझे भी ऐसा कट कर लगता है थोड़ी।
वो तो मैं वैसे ही रहूँगी।
ऐसे ही था पहले भी ऐसे।
इसके लिए जो बीच वाला है इसके अंदर के तीनों चीज़ के लिए मैं अलग आती हूँ जो फायर पॉलिश रहती करेंगे। मैं अभी आप लोगों पे सिर्फ
इसमें ये इतना बढ़ेगा क्या स्टिकर मारेंगे तो बढ़ेगा।
Zardozi is a technique which is done by needle and thread, unlike Ari, which is done with a tambour hook. Zardozi is a very old technique used in India, and it has come down for many generations. Mainly, these used to be used for garments for the old Rajas, Maharajas, and the Mughals, who had embroidered garments and carpets and tents made out of Zardozi.
So that's one that I did about a year and a half ago, and then I'm going to show you another one that I did about 10 months ago. And the whole point behind this, in terms of the end user and people parting with money, is I did that one completely on my own. Okay, I'm the producer, I'm doing everything, audio, sound, post-production, etc. Same on this next one.
What I like about minor league baseball.
What I like about minor league baseball.
Minor league baseball is
Family affordable. Bring the family down, have some fun, watch a good game.
All players down here at Paw Sox, all good games, there's some great pitches down
You
here.
can take your family, your friends, and have a good time, and enjoy the food and
There's a lot of hustle out there, and it's a lot of drive. It's a lot of wanting to get to that next step, so it's good baseball.
What I like about minor league baseball.
What I like about minor league baseball. What I like about minor league baseball.
what I like about minor league baseball.
What I like about minor league baseball.
The price is right, basically. I'm a cheap son of a gun.
It's a great game because these kids are all coming up from here up to the Red Sox.
The action and the excitement from the fans.
Players, they play a top-notch game.
Fans cheering the Paw Sox.
To take all these kids to the ball game and teach them about the game.
Hey, peanuts! Peanuts! Peanuts!
So I got a little off track there. What I meant to say, what I was talking about before, was this question of what motivates you to continue taking pictures. As I said, I already talked about the political, the intellectual, economic one. As I said, I've sort of more accidental, but I'm getting pretty good at my old age. But as I said, the other one is I have this thing as I like to do, take what I call little adventures. And so one of the other things that I'm known for, and this is one of my only two specialties, is that I'm known for light studies, which are photo essays on different buildings in different places. This is 30th Street Station in Philadelphia. How many of you have been to 30th Street Station? How many of you go downstairs to Penn Station and think, what kind of sewer hole is that? And then you go to Philadelphia and say, wow, this is a, yeah.
Let me go to the post office.
Well, let's hope so, yeah.
No, it's the old station.
So these are just, they're not political. They're mostly about a space. They're a lot about light and atmosphere and time of day. I'm basically just trying to say this is a beautiful building. It should be respected, appreciated. Apparently in the 70s when the old Penn Station was torn down, Philadelphia was so poor they couldn't afford to tear this thing down, thank God. I'm on the 5th floor catwalks looking straight down. Fingerprints and oil from people's hands backlit on a glass door at the end of the day. And so this was initially used by the Philadelphia Inquirer Sunday magazine and has been used over a lot. And also I sell these prints as fine art prints, and I'll talk about fine art in a little bit when we get to revenue streams. Another one of these light studies I did also for the Philadelphia Inquirer Sunday magazine, the Western Wall and the holiest shrine of the Jewish faith. Morning light, right after a rainstorm when you don't usually find, it's hard to find it with only one person there. At night, another light study. This is on Center City, Philadelphia, also for the Inquirer Sunday magazine. And yes, I'm standing on a mailbox. And this is the bad old days of film when you didn't know until you processed the film that you had both feet off the ground. How it was used by the Inquirer. The Western Wall story actually won an award from a publication called Communication Arts. Okay, we're going to slowly transition to the stuff you want to start paying attention to. On the editorial side, does anybody know the two most important ways to make lots of money as an editorial photographer? Get your work published in the Sunday New York Times magazine, or win an award from the Communication Arts Photography Annual, okay? If you're serious about any kind of publication photography, and one of the things you need to understand is the idea of publication photography gets broader and broader every year. Those old divisions get blurred constantly. But Communication Arts, every year, they have a photography annual competition. The deadline just passed, so you can't do it for this year, but you want to first be looking at it every year, paying attention, and then eventually when you've got work up to a certain standard, you want to enter. I won this award from CA in, I think, 92 or 93, and I'm not exaggerating. I was fat and happy for 5 years. All right? CA is still the best. New York Times isn't what it used to be, but CA is still wonderful. And so among the things that have spun off is that I ended up getting hired by a magazine to do a story much like the Wall story, but actually on the Dome of the Rock, one of the 3 holiest shrines in Islam. Another story for the same magazine on the Islamic architecture in a city called Ahmedabad. This is actually in Mexico, and I'm just compressing a bunch of different light studies into a smaller set. Guatemala, Cuba. Can't have a Cuba picture without at least one cigar. It's from India, Bangladesh, also in Bangladesh. And so for me as the artist, for lack of a better term, and I don't like the term, but I'll use it anyway, this is what I like to do just in terms of single photographs. The two things I like to do are those in-depth stories, the foreclosure thing, the Israeli-Palestinian, the pesticides, or just going out and photographing the play of light and shadow. We're in India here. Mosquito netting also in India. Pilgrims at twilight. And yes, if you look on the TVs to your left, you'll see a beautiful purple sky, and it really was that purple. And yes, there really is a street light overhead and a cement pillar underneath my camera so I could rest my camera on it. A night food market. So, the lessons I've learned the hard way. All right, so now we're really going to get into the stuff that I promised you at the beginning. I know that was a little long, but I hope I answered a couple questions. Why am I up here? what are the sort of bullet points or landmarks you need to pay attention to on the way? And I'm not paying attention to my driving as I tell you about landmarks, but that's why I did that. And so I'm going to run through now, and this thing I'm about to talk about, the notes that are, the lessons that are in there are on the PDF, so don't obsess about writing them down, but do think, oh yeah, I want to go back and pay attention to that one. All right, like I should be paying more attention to my driving. I'm driving from South Florida to North Florida for a foreclosure shoot last month, by the way.
How'd you set it?
Say again?
How'd you set the camera?
The camera is in, you take the, actually let me do this at the end, but that,
Okay.
yeah, remind me at the end.
Sorry.
Okay, all right. So here's the lessons, and let's see if I can do this right. Do the job and never make excuses. Pack, plan, and execute with that in mind. Okay, I carry double backup on everything when I go out on a job, except I don't have 2 laptops. Though what I do have is I do have 2 hard drives, and ironically, having a hard drive came in handy today because my laptop wouldn't agree with the internet here, so we ended up doing it off their laptop. So I survived that. Don't go into the business part-time or half-heartedly. The degree of competition, the kind of opportunities, good and bad, are greater than ever. If you love photography but do not love business, stay out of the business. Get everything in writing, even if just an email to verify a conversation. A professional photographer is somebody who's been harangued, ripped off, and all sorts of other adjectives that I can't use by people who don't know what they're doing but control the purse strings. And I could tell you 2 hours worth of stories that would make your skin crawl. I won't sneeze without something in writing, and people still do things stupid, even though I have it in writing. So get everything in writing. This is really important. It's a little more on the editorial side, but I think it applies to almost all end users. Editors hire you to do what they need to have done, but they're interested in what it is that you want to do. And what that means is a lot of the editorial work I get is not as interesting as the foreclosure project, but all the photo editors feel like, well, they're subsidizing that thing, and they know it's important, and they believe in it, so they pay me to do this, and I do that. So don't say, oh, I'm only going to show them what I think they want. Also show them who you are, because that's another one of those things that's going to differentiate you from me, from them. Always find an ancillary benefit to everything you do. If no ancillary benefit exists for a job, price the work so high that it covers the lost benefit or don't do the job. Okay? So I'm always multitasking. If I'm being sent somewhere, these days if I go anywhere in the country, I'm automatically thinking, all right, can I line up a foreclosure shoot wherever that is? That's my first default right now. Perfect your understanding of cost-benefit analysis. I know this is really boring, but it's really important. My time is worth X. The people who clean my house, unfortunately, in this economy, their time is only worth Y. And the interns that I work with, who are Brown and RISD students, who are very smart, by the way, at the moment, their time is only worth Z. When they graduate and they move on to investment banking, their time will be worth A, but at the moment, their time is worth Z. Figure out objectively, what it is that you can do better than the other photographer. And this is usually not technological. For example, do you have a clear difference in style, a language facility, access to a subculture? Remember I said I spent 2 weeks in yeshiva? Puts me a little bit ahead of some people. Study the market for commercial photography and the cultural milieu for fine art photography. Milieu is a French word which means market, but it means not just commercial, just the whole thing of photography. Understand where they intersect and where they diverge. Pay attention to how fickle the spotlight is in each of them and in all of life. Build networks. These are just my networks, simplistic, but I have a close circle of friends, family, and peers. I have a larger circle of friends whose input I seek and I value, and then I have a larger circle of friends and acquaintances that I update on my activities. And all of these people know about what I'm doing, and they get shared varying degrees of information. And my entire network knows about this foreclosure thing. I've got a guy in Minnesota who says if I ever can get to Minnesota, he'd be happy to help me out. I just got to get to Minnesota now. So anybody want to send me to Minnesota for money? So my network is, and I don't have a great network. I don't have 8,000 fans on Facebook or whatever, but I'm building a network. It's something, unfortunately, in this market you simply have to do. Know when to seek input from your networks and peers as well as when to ignore them. Know when to ignore what you read online, which is pretty much everything. And when to follow the advice that you pay for, which is most of the time. If you're going to do this professionally, accept the reality of living and working in the real world and pay for advice. I have an accountant, I have a lawyer, technically I have multiple lawyers. Figure out which sources of external validation matter and which to ignore. Money is one example, but by no means the only one. My foreclosure project was recently published in a magazine called Witness, which is a little literary journal at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. It happens that they paid me, which was really nice, but just the fact that they published it and they reproduced it beautifully and they wrote this nice thing about me, it was a way of saying, yes, this work that I'm doing is not only good to me, but perfect strangers think that it's valid. And that's really important. Money is one example, but it's not the only one. Everyone you know, or who knows you, should know what your expertise is in terms of getting paid for work. They should also know what you're passionate about photographing so they can help you with that passion or can connect you to people who can. And again, don't worry about writing these down. These are in the PDF I'll give you at the end. All right? Never do work where there's no tangible benefit in return. Access to subject matter, in my case, is a tangible benefit. A warm feeling in my heart when they put my little byline at the bottom. A byline is worth nothing, okay? Access to subject matter, for me, getting into a foreclosed house is worth a lot of effort. Donate actual tax-deductible money to nonprofits. Otherwise, insist on payment from them when you do actual work for them. When the staffers and the administrators of those nonprofits start working for free, you should also. Tax law is your friend. Tax law is your enemy. Know the tax law. Why did, what's his name, go to jail? I don't even know the name. Al Capone. Why did Al Capone go to jail? Tax evasion. You apparently can kill people in this country, but you can't evade your taxes. And of course, it's appropriate because I just filed taxes recently. So keep up to date on the technology, the law, and the general practice of your field. Don't depend on others to do this for you. They're only going to be focused on what's in their interest. They're going to miss the points that really matter, or they're too lazy to do it right. So unfortunately, you have to do it yourself. What technology gear? Okay, so those are the lessons. And again, don't obsess about writing them down because at the very end, I'm going to post a URL, and you can go back to downloading almost all this stuff. There we go. Ta-da! I use these things. I use this guy right here, and I use this guy right here. And the reason that I use them is not because Olympus pays me. Like I said, I will use them before I got involved with Olympus, and I'll use them afterwards. They solve my problem. And one of my problems, actually, is I have to get everything that I own when I go out for a job in a bag that small that'll go in the overhead compartment, okay? Another thing, I don't do a lot of long lens stuff. I no longer chase politicians down the street. I don't do a lot of direct on-camera flash. I do a lot of basically street photography and what you saw me doing in the foreclosure. Those are the only two things I do these days. And for me, they're very small. They travel light. They work great in low light. The nicest thing, they have a 24 f2 and a 91.8, which are the primary lenses I use for this foreclosure project because I have so much great control over depth of field. So they solve my problem. I started out back in the Stone Age using Canons, as you saw. I used Olympus, the old film cameras, for a while. I got a grant from Nikon, and they bought me off. And then I started for years using Contax rangefinders, which are like Leicas, but they're autofocus. And I would still be using Contax rangefinders and slide film, but something came along and negated the need for slides. So when I went digital, I had these funny Contax cameras, and Contax did not go digital. So I did not have legacy lenses like most of you have, either Canon or Nikon. So I looked around, and when I went digital, Olympus was the only one with the self-cleaning chip, which for all the travel I do is enormously important. So for me, I went with Olympus. So I'm going to go through my bag and my gear and show you just a little bit more about that. This is how I walk around most of the time. This is a slightly older version of the Olympus camera, EPL1. I'm now using a 2 and a 3. There's a camera, there's my microphone, straight bracket, and a little tabletop tripod. That way I can do animations, I can do stills, I can do video, I can do time lapse, I can do audio. These are the things that are in my bag. I've got and I'm not going to do the whole bag, I'm just going to show you a couple things. EPL3, I think I went too fast. If you're photographing inside foreclosed houses and strange angles, that fold-out screen is enormously important. I do tons and tons of work on that, and so for me it solves my problem. The question to ask any photographer who says buy this or buy that, what's the problem you're solving? And for me, working at odd angles, that folding out screen does a good job. I also use an EP3. The lenses in the Olympus have a conversion factor of 2, so that's actually a 18 to 36. And then I have this little one right here. This is my airport camera. Let me take this one thing off and I'll show you why. Because it's white plastic, they think I'm like a teenage girl. I was photographing in Newark Airport last year, and I never got stopped once because of this thing. And I made this bet in my head and said, they're not going to bother me because they don't think I'm serious. And because it's got the little white plastic, and it has lesser features than the other one, but they're all the same chip, this is my when you think you're going to get in trouble camera. And it's amazing how well it works. This is what I look like when I'm out photographing. I know, dumpy middle-aged white guy. But a couple things. Nice hat. My wife loves a hat. I don't have a real camera bag on purpose. Okay, I've got the 2 cameras with the tabletop tripod that I showed you. And here's the cool thing. You're right next to me. You've got a Nikon D3, an 80-200, a lens that'll kill small children. That hood thing out there, you swing it around, 6 people are dead. And who are they going to glom onto and bother? They're going to bother you. They're going to leave me alone. It makes a huge difference in terms of working in the third world. And all the places I work, people just tend to leave me alone because I don't look serious. So that's why, and now I'm going to put it all back in to really prove the point that everything that I carry, which is 3 bodies, a whole slew of lenses, tabletop tripod, flash cards, all that stuff fits in my little roller bag, which goes on the airplane, and my laptop, which goes in my backpack, and I can go anywhere. So for me, it solves my problem. The other thing that I'm a strong proponent of, the best tripod is the one you have with you, a tabletop tripod. You have all seen these, I hope. Enormous fan of these. Though you saw in the video that I was doing with my big Gitzo tripod, most of what I do is like this. Hang on a second. There we go, just like that. Put the lens out. There we go. Ooh, that's nice. I could get a 2-second exposure. If I press hard, I could probably get even longer. I'm a huge proponent of these. So I'm going to do 5 minutes of commercials. Don't get paid by Bogan to sell tripods. I'm just a big proponent of this. Is in Vietnam. Also in Vietnam, there was that great little piece of metal there last year. One hand holds the camera, one hand holds the tripod. Nothing personal, Jim, I'm going to keep my tripod here. This is also in Vietnam. It's a 6-second exposure, if you'll notice. I'm sorry, it's an 8-second exposure. Shutter will close, and then the dragon lady will come along and give me the evil eye here. Just a minute. There we go. So people say to me, why do you use a tabletop tripod when you're photographing architecture in southern India for a light study? And the answer is my job is to get all this incredible detail here, and the only way you're going to get that detail is to be at f/16. The only way you're going to be at f/16 is to be on a tripod, because I'm using a 20-300 lens at 300. That's, I mean, my guide, more of the same, because I have to get all this incredible carving and architectural detail there. Back in the embroidery shop. Also in southern India. The other thing I use is either a cable release or I use the 2-second self-timer. That's the picture I made. This is my wife made a nice little video of me hard at work. So I get it all set up, and then I'm going to wait for people to walk by, and I'm going to ambush them. And the animation you saw at the beginning and the end of the embroidery podcast was made with the camera upside down, but the camera doesn't care. And some more examples of pictures I made in tabletop tripod, the Pilgrims at Twilight, night market in Sri Lanka. And the nice thing about this is it enables me to do everything at the native ISO for the chip, so I get the very best file quality. And since I make my living as a stock / editorial photographer, I need to have the very best file quality. All right, circling back. How do you get paid to do what you want to do, and what are your revenue streams? Remember I promised you I'd tell you this? Before I do that, though, did you know there's 148 uses for an image? Somebody called me up a couple years ago, and this is on the PDF that you'll get at the end, so don't worry about this. But said, we want you to do an assignment in southern Rhode Island, where I live. And I said, okay, sure, what is the use? I price all of my assignments on how the photo is going to be used. And the woman said, I don't know. So I said, oh, it'd be good exercise. So I went online, and I found 148 uses for an image. My personal favorite, ferry terminal advertising. So I went to her and I said, here's a list. All the ones you take off, I can charge you less. She said, I want them all. I said $10,000. Obviously, we didn't make any progress there. T-shirts. I encourage you to download this list and have it handy, because when somebody calls you up and says they want to use one of your photos, you actually want to say, okay, that's great, I'd love to work with you, but what are you going to use it for? And if they're smart, they're thinking, oh, we'll pay you $200 and we'll use it for everything imaginable. It's the next Bruce Springsteen album cover. And the $20,000 they should have paid you, $19,800 that they get to keep, somebody gets a big reward. It's not you. So there are 148 uses for an image that you might license. And there are probably more, but these are the ones I found. And I would encourage you to start to get this list off of my site. It's part of the PDF that I'm going to give you link you to at the end. And it's just something to start thinking about the value of your work. And so now we're going into what you came for. All right? So I'm going to walk you through a bunch of URLs. These URLs are also on the PDF that I'm going to direct you to at the end, so don't worry about writing them down. But the question is, how do you figure out assignment and usage fees? Does anybody know? Let's see if this is going to work. It's actually really, really easy. The answer is, what will the market bear? It's the only answer that matters. It's not what you think. It's not what your mother said your photos are worth. It's what the market will bear. And it used to be that when you wanted to price something, you'd have to call all these people up. But now you can actually go, and I'm just going to Photo Shelter only because this photo here is a photo very similar to one I have. And so I did this exercise for somebody, and then I realized it was a good teaching point. So then I click on there. And am I going to buy a print, or am I going to download it and use it editorially? I'm going to download it, use it editorially. Oh, I don't know, let's go country, US, advertising, brochure, double page, 5 years. $1,000. I don't know if you're going to get $1,000, but when you were happy at 200, you left 800 on the table. And I got to track you down and kill you because you're destroying the market for me. These pricing mechanisms are out there. So the first thing you should be doing, besides that list of 148, now we really are the minutia of how are you going to make a living? Well, number one, be aware that your work has real value. 148 uses maybe. Number two, how do you actually get the price? The first thing is go to Photo Shelter, Getty, Corbis, and you should be in the habit of doing that as soon as somebody calls you up. You never price on the fly. Somebody calls you up and says, we want you to do this. You should ask them the questions. You say, I'll get back to you. And you hang up, and then you go on the line and you do all these questions, and you price it. You can do the exact same thing for wedding work, for portrait work. Advertising work, as of yet, is still not as largely diffused price-wise on the web, so that's a little bit harder. But most of the kinds of editorial, portraits, family weddings, etc., that kind of stuff you can price right off the web, and that's the only pricing that matters, which is what'll somebody pay you. Nothing else matters. Resources for, how many of you know about this program? This guy named Craddock Bagshaw who lives out in Washington State, and he has 3 programs called the Keyworder, the Photo Quote, and PhotoBiz. PhotoBiz is the one I use because it has Photo Quote built in. It has a pricing thing just like I walked you through, but it's a piece of software. And the other thing that I use here is it has a bunch of pre-written letters, and if you write a letter, it will also store that letter. And you're absolutely correct. You can do all of this stuff on Microsoft Word and Excel. The question is, what's your time worth against the fact that he makes this program and he updates it every 5 years and he sells 10,000 copies. So it's usually a better use of your time to pay somebody who has the expertise than to try to do it yourself. So I use Photo Quote. Where am I? How many know what ASMP is? American Society of Media Photographers. Okay, how many of you know what PP of A is? It's a wedding bar mitzvah crowd. How many of you know what APA is? Used to be the advertising crowd, they just changed their name. You want to go to all of their sites, and you want to spend time on all of their sites. How many people here have college degrees? I'm not being in any way. Okay. You at one point in time spent a lot of time learning how to do something that you may or may not be getting paid to do now. If you want to do this as a professional, this is just as serious. And so you need to go to the sites of all the trade groups. And the ASMP site is nice because if you go over here, all these things over here are open to anybody. Once you hit the members and on down, then you have to be a member. But at least half the information on things like, and this is probably the best one, tutorials and forms, educational video, books, pricing guides, business management software, all this information, that's open to anybody. And if you really want to get serious about this, you simply have to read it and know it. Okay. These are, it's very interesting. I ran into the B&H sensor here. Okay, and I know why I did, and I'll show you in just a second. What I was going to show you is the places you can go to get mailing lists to promote yourself. Okay, so you've decided, you walked out of here and you said, yes, I am going to do this. I think I can do this in 5 years. And I'm going to develop a 5-year business plan, which is really not a bad idea, by the way. And I'm going to save money, and I'm going to take these classes so I can do multimedia, and in 5 years I'm going to start, or in 3 years I'm going to start the transition, in 5 years I'm going to do it. So who are you going to start promoting yourself to? Well, you can, if you choose to, actually buy lists from companies like Adbase is one, and it's just adbase.com. The other one is Fresh Lists, which is right here. And the other way you can do it if you're a little cheaper like me is you can go to one called mastheads.org. And what Mastheads is I think it's a wiki technically, where everybody who's a member contributes the name, addresses, and phone numbers of the photo editors and art directors and stuff of all sorts of magazines. There's a decent amount of scantily clad women on the Mastheads page because they're sending you to magazines like Esquire and FHM and all that. I think that's why we got blocked. But Mastheads is a great resource, but it's going to take a lot more work on your part. But it's a way of, the question is, how do you find these people? In the case of editorial, it's either you buy the list or you go and make a list yourself. In other kinds of work, it may be more networking, word of mouth. In the wedding business, key to wedding business photography, anybody know the key to wedding business photography? Most people who do this series will tell you it's usually wedding planners. Word of mouth is certainly great, but the next best thing is wedding planners, because they're people who are hired by people who are willing to part with large amounts of money to pay them, and therefore they're likely to part with large amounts of money to pay you. And so the point being that in any kind of photography, you can usually find who the gatekeepers are. And that's what the whole point of this stop in our little tour is. What else have I got here? Talked about that. Oh, yes. All right. This is my site. It's actually called thewellspoint.com. I do encourage you to go there. One of the things you want to look at right over here is I have a huge list of resources, and you're welcome to look at it. One of the pages you want to look at is, where is it? Oh, art consultants, right there. You want to look at the page for art consultants. These are people who decorate hotel interiors, office parks, hospitals, etc. They're not fine art galleries. They're not in Soho. You're not going to get reviewed in the New Yorker next month. On the other hand, they're going to buy lots of pictures of train stations from me to put in buildings all over the East Coast, basically. My biggest volume in this realm is the train station pictures. Okay, because they're timeless. I tell them over and over they're not Penn Station. I think they sell them to people as if they are Penn Station. I don't know. But this is a very good business, but it's very, very clear what they want and what they don't want. No nudes, nothing political. They're decorating office parks and office interiors, but it's a good market for me. It's one of my other revenue streams. And it's right on the Wells Point website. And the other one also on the Wells Point website, I have a whole page on pricing, rates, and rights, which I'd refer you to. Talked about that. Taxes, we've already talked about. Who has professional insurance? Who knows that when their camera's stolen and the insurance agent you go and make a claim to goes on the web and sees you have a site, that insurance agent's job is to discount your claim because you're a professional and your cameras are not covered under your homeowner's policy. So do not risk that. When you get serious, you have to buy real insurance. There are 3 components to real insurance. Your cameras, which you know about. You also want to get what's called liability, which is you drop a tripod in somebody's head and they sue you. And the one you want to get, which is actually for my business the most important one, and for most commercial photographers, is it's called errors and omissions. And what it refers to is if there's any kind of error or omission in a contractual relationship. And when my insurance agent suggested about 6 years ago, I said, what's that about? He said, oh, it's becoming all the rage. What happens apparently is somebody does a $200,000 wedding and the bride doesn't like the photos and she sues for $200,000 because she wants to do the whole wedding all over again. And so, not that you want to go through that, but if you don't have errors and omissions insurance, you're vulnerable. Whether you're going to actually pay the penalty doesn't matter, you're vulnerable. So your insurance has to cover those three things. Like I said, we've already talked about taxes. That's the Al Capone question. Do you want 30 seconds on model releases? Yes. Yes, no, maybe. Most of what you read on the web is wrong about model releases. There's really only one question about model releases. Doesn't matter where you stand. I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. Do I have any lawyers here, by the way? Must have at least one. Nobody's putting their hand up. Releases are really simple. Doesn't matter where you're standing. Doesn't matter if the cop across the street gives you permission or not. What matters is how is the photo used, not where it was taken, not what anybody said to you. If it's published in what is broadly defined as an editorial usage, First Amendment, freedom of expression, art galleries so far, inside of books, inside of newspapers, etc. To date, though there's been many lawsuits, no one has ever lost on the editorial side. This side over here is the endorsement side. If there's an implied or stated endorsement, you will get sued, and because we do have lawyers in this room who are keeping their hands down, somebody will make a lot of money. So don't fiddle with model releases. The divide is really clear. How is it being used? Not where it's taken, not where you were standing. None of that stuff matters. If there's an implied or stated endorsement on this side, you've got a problem. If it's an editorial use to date, even though there's a lot of money that changes hands, even though you get paid for the photograph, so far to date, that divide has largely stood. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I could do 2 hours on releases in great detail, but that's the fundamental divide. What else? Property releases. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about stock. I'm going to talk a tiny bit about copyright law. All right? I make my living as a stock photographer. I am not suggesting you become a stock photographer, but I do want you to understand, number one, how much work is involved, which will scare most of you out of it, which is probably good. Number two, reminder that there is money to be made there if you, like any of these other kinds of photography, you treat it seriously. Does that look like a AAA map cover for Virginia? If you cut off, right, you cut the tree right in half, get rid of that, type the word Virginia across, automobile. It was AAA map cover for Virginia a few years ago. This is from the Marine Corps story. Any idea what year that was made? 1983. From the train station story. Remember that guy we saw him before? He keeps recurring. Bad motel in New Jersey. I didn't think much of it. One of my agents really liked it, and he was right. The Guardian liked it too, and they parted with money for it. This is from the Marine Corps story. I've had so much luck with silhouettes like this that have been used over and over and published. I now copy my own photographs. This is a graduation. This is my biggest dollar seller ever. Why is this such a special photograph? Because you're all horrified at the thought of why would somebody pay money for that? When this was a big seller in 1992, it was impossible to find a photograph of a stop sign without telephone lines or junk around it. Now, of course, they just clone it out, but back then they actually paid for it, and it became a compact computer advertising campaign. My biggest seller month in, month out, not volume-wise, but day to day. I know you're thinking these are really generic. Stock photos are generic. They're undated, too. The foreclosure project is the fastest project I've ever done from initial shoot to start getting money. Forbes used it. My favorite subject. She was, in fact, the Huggies diaper baby for the first 5 years of her life. This is my digital darkroom. So now I'm going to take you to my workflow. Remember I said what you should ask a photographer? What gear do they use? Which I just did. Why do they use it? I tried to do. And now the incredibly boring, incredibly important part about workflow. And I'm going to just do a really compressed version of it because normally I do a 2-hour version, but I'll give you about a 15-minute version of it. That's my digital darkroom. Isn't it nice? First thing I do is I take them off the flashcards. I used to put them on like those Epson battery-powered hard drives. Now I go right to my MacBook Air because my MacBook Air is so small I can carry it all the time. And then I change the file names to my naming convention. Everybody know what a naming convention is? A bunch of names get together and elect a candidate. Naming convention. A naming convention is so you can find your photographs in a hurry. That's what a naming convention is. Don't use my naming convention. But if you look online, you can see lots and lots of photographers' naming conventions. You can also see lots of naming conventions for Word documents and stuff too, because all this digital data has got to be organized somehow. My naming convention, this works for me, is season, year, and location. And I mention that because for me, I go to the same place almost every year at the same season. So I need to have season first. Year's less important, and this is some kind of reference point. So then you end up with, on the left, those were my Olympus RAW files, ORF. That's the original name, and then I renamed them to this, all right? And so that has a unique name that doesn't exist anywhere else in the universe of my photography. This is my hard drive farm, isn't that nice? Always they're in pairs for double backup. Everybody does double backup here, right? Yeah. Everybody can say, I have 2 copies of everything of mine, and yeah. Hard drives. Lesson number 1 about hard drives. Never have the same brand or model in one pair. They're set that way on purpose. Far 2 are my stock business. Next 2 are my stock that's been through the system. This is backing up my laptop. This is backing up my other laptop. And then these 2 down here you can't see are backing up my video stuff. And they're all in pairs, so if one goes bad, the other one is still good. I just bought a RAID system, which I'm still figuring out. And I back them up on DVDs, which are always in pairs for double backup. My DVDs have the Olympus RAW files and the Adobe D&G, so I've got 2 different RAW files. Gold foil rather than vegetable dye, because your typical DVDs are made with vegetable dye and they're going to last about 20 years. These DVDs, and there's 2 of them in those cases, are archival in theory to 100 years. We'll see, I won't be around. Always in pairs. No writing on your discs. How many of you write on your discs? Because the ink creeps through and it lifts the metal or the vegetable dye where the actual information is stored. The only place to write on your discs, if you have to write, is in the little circle right in the middle. You really don't even want to do that. One of the things to take away from this is to don't beat yourself up about the past stuff, but from now on, right, okay? Well, I'll show you. The discs themselves are not labeled. The discs have to stay with my naming convention in these cases, because if they don't, you are correct, I would be lost. So I know that there's 2 discs inside there, June 2004, Italy number 2, and there's 2 discs right in there. So I have to keep them together. How many of you know what a graphics tablet is? I use a graphics tablet in place of a mouse. A mouse is very unergonomic. It uses this pen right here, and we're used to using pens in terms of just going around. I only need it for one thing. Click on and off. The higher end the higher end graphics tablets have 512 levels of pressure for $400. This has 64 levels of pressure for $40, and that's 63 more than I need. But so then what I do is I copy them from my desktop onto 2 hard drives. They're being mirrored. I then divide them into documentary, which basically means faces and model release issues, and non-documentaries, which has no faces and no model release issues. And then I start sending them out to the various agencies, and they have their various tracking numbers. And so this is my day job. I actually register all my work with Library of Congress. Every single picture I made since 2001 was registered with Library of Congress. I live for the day that somebody does something stupid. I can't tell you how excited I am about that, because I had a lost slide case years and years ago in the bad old days when slides were the thing that really mattered. And at the end of the process, I got the down payment on my current house. So I live for that. This is the actual material that I send to Library of Congress. They're called deposit copies. I'm not going to go too much into this process, but I send them 4x6 contact sheets with 12 images on a sheet. You can also send them CDs, DVDs, or a video with each image on the screen for 5 seconds, which sounds unbelievably painful to make. And then I put labels on them. Then this is a form that I'll get back. And I would actually bore you to sleep right now and take you through the ECO, the Electronic Copyright Office tutorial, but I won't, just to save you that grief. But I do all the registrations online. You have 2 choices. It's $45 to register with a paper form or $35 to register electronically. I register electronically. You can register as much stuff as you want within 1 year for 1 fee. If you register it as unpublished, you never have to register it again. It's your lifetime plus 70 years. So all the work that I'm doing now, in theory, if I live another 30 years, just makes the math easy. It's got 100 years. And after that, it goes in the public domain, and you can do whatever you want with it. So I register on average about once a month. I average about 500 images per registration per month. This is the copyright form I'll get back. Continue my workflow. Then what I do is I go through, grab all the images that are the same. I do a rough white balance. I put them on my slide tracking sheet, which records where my images go. The image exclusive agents, which are at the top because they make more money, and then the non-image exclusive agents are at the bottom. They get the remaining work. And it's a question of how do you send it out, CDs, TIFFs, FTP. This is my day job, filling out these paperwork here. The good news is that my daughter and my imaginary grandchildren, because my daughter's only 19, but these imaginary grandchildren are the great beneficiary of this system because it's all very well organized. Then I post them on the web for review, either web page of my own, FTP, or their site. They tell me what they want. I go back to my tracking sheets. I make a proof sheet. The proof sheet is labeled by the agent name and my naming convention. So in this case, it says, September 2005, I was in Sri Lanka. These are non-documentary that have no faces, and they're at this agency called Aurora. And that's how I track everything. Staple them to the slide tracking sheet, and then I go through and I dump the similars. The red I get rid of, and I keep the greens. That's what I'm doing right here. The bulk of your money in stock photography is made on exclusivity. How many people do royalty-free or microstock in this room? Can't figure out if you're embarrassed because I'm asking you, or if nobody does it. Good, by the way, if you don't. When microstock and royalty-free came out, those of us who do what's called rights managed, where the people who license them actually control the usage, we all would get on our pedestal and complain about the immorality of royalty-free and microstock. And then that didn't change anybody's mind. So there's a new tack. It doesn't make sense economically. If you're downloading a photo and you're making 23 cents a photo, unless it's downloaded 1,000 times, 23 cents 1,000 times, I think you just made $230. I make $230 on one usage. So microstock doesn't make money logically. Forget about the moral issues and stuff like that. All of the stock photography I do is rights managed. I am not a brilliant stock photographer, but what I'm trying to get you to understand is that I've developed a system, and the other thing is that I don't photograph the same thing everybody else does. You can go on the web and you can buy photos of the Eiffel Tower, and they'll pay you to publish their photos of the Eiffel Tower. It's that bad. If you can give them stuff, people don't photograph really mundane stuff like traffic, believe it or not. It's hard to get photos of good traffic, hard to get photos of foreclosures. So I've done all right. And the next thing I do in my workflow is I keyword, because all images these days are searched through keywords. More keywording. This is the bane of my existence. That's what those Brown and RISD students get to do for their internships. They keyword. Then I make the final high reses for the agencies. This is a typical format for a stock photo, a 50 meg file, either a JPEG that opens at 50 meg or a TIFF. They're not sharpened, 5 on the black and 250 on the white. Stock photos are not art, and they're not sharpened. They're a little bit flat. If you're interested in doing about this, is the kind of minutia you need to pay attention to in terms of doing stock photography. Everything that I do are done by using actions, which is what Photoshop calls a repeated step that's recorded over and over. And in Lightroom, I think they're called presets, but basically it's the same thing. You put a bunch of raw files in a folder, you hit a button, you come back 5 minutes later and it's made them into the finished files the way you want. So then I go, and this is a final archival set, and you can see this is the stuff from September 2005 in Sri Lanka, and those are all the different agents who picked up all the photos. A couple sort of downsides of stock photography. It is on average 3 years from click to check. So you're not going to make any money fast. All right? So don't think this is a get-rich-quick scheme. Number 2, it's a volume business. I move about 400 to 600 images every single month through this system that I'm describing. They don't keep 400 to 600 images, but I move them through. And then the last one is I have about 9,000 images with 10 agents, because I've been doing this for a very long time. It is a good business if you treat it just as seriously as anything else in terms of putting a lot of time into it, keeping organized, understanding the law, understanding all the legal, economic consequences. For me, it works. I'm not saying to do it, but I'm just telling you it works for me. The thing is, I only keep the raw files and the XMPs, and XMPs are just notations of how to open the file next time. I don't keep all the millions of JPEGs and TIFFs. I'd run out of storage space instantly. More note-taking. This is my file drawer. Isn't that exciting? Don't get excited. These are the agencies that I worked with. They open and close all the time. Half of them are out of business. This is where you find stock photo agents. If people are interested, you go to a site called Picture Archive Council of America. Let's see if this is going to work. Oh, it did. They didn't get... all right. You go to the member directory. You make the member directory bigger for people to see. What do you think they want? Oh. All right. What do you think these guys want? Right here. It's not rocket science. And again, don't do stock photography. What I'm saying is the amazing thing about the web, for better or for worse, is 99% of the information you need to know on almost any kind of photography, from portraits to weddings to stock to magazine, to sports, especially tons of sports, sports shooter being an example. All that stuff is actually out there if you spend the time researching it. And so this is where you would go if you're interested in finding stock photo agencies. This site is set up for the agents. It's not for photographers. You can certainly go here, but they're actually trying to get cooperation and cross-fertilization, if you will, between agencies. They're not actually trying to find photographers, but you can find the agencies through this resource. And this is just one example of an agency that's on that list that I just showed you. It's called the ImageWorks. They're in Woodstock, New York. And they actually have a little thing right over there where it says prospective photographers, and they describe what their requirements are, what the contract is, and all that kind of stuff. And usually if you dig around enough into most of, but not all the agencies, there'll be some page somewhere that'll say something like prospective photographers join us, etc. All right. The photographer's daily to-do list. This is what I do every day. I read emails, answer emails, send emails. I network on Facebook. I network on LinkedIn. It gets worse. This is on the PDF, so don't obsess about it. Keeps going. You know what, I was thinking on the train down here, I have to, because this was created by another photographer and I keep growing it, but I now need to put, find interns, interview interns, train interns, work with interns, fire interns. Oh, here we go. By a guy named George Remington in Ohio. It's a good thing to have. It's also in the PDF that you'll get at the end. And just the idea is you shouldn't be getting up every morning saying, did I do all those? Because you'll drive yourself out of your mind. But it's a reminder of, it's not just taking pictures. There's all these millions of things you got to do. That's all. All right, so I promised I'd come back to my income streams and my pricing strategies. On assignment work, somebody calls me up and they want me to do something. The very first question when somebody calls you up and asks you to do an assignment, the very first question is, anybody know?
What is it about?
Well, even before that. What's your budget? Oh, our budget's $50. Oh, have a nice day. Oh, our budget's, well, our going rate is, okay, you're in the neighborhood. But if we don't, or does it pay? Oh, we don't pay, we give credit lines. All right, well, that was pretty quick and painless. So first question is, what's the budget? And then for me, interesting content, is there a resale value? Can I piggyback it on other work, paying or personal in the same space? Stock image licensing. This is what I was talking about before. I do it what's called through the agents of 50%. You can license stock directly. The problem with licensing stock directly is, what do you have that everybody else doesn't have? And there's an agency called Check 6, which does nothing but military aircraft. And they actually go direct because they know that nobody else can get pictures of military aircraft the way they can. My work is not that distinctive, so I lose 50%, but I don't have to spend any time marketing. I do workshop teaching. Workshops for me, besides being fun, I seem to be pretty good at it. I get to go interesting places. It generates stock images, new students, and potential networking opportunities. I do the fine art print sales, which I talked before about with the train station and that list of corporate fine art dealers. The question always is, how many do they want, where are they going? And the newest thing is that they want to print it themselves because they think they can save money. So the newest thing is now I'm only charging a licensing fee, and I don't print them, which some ways is faster, but I don't make as much. Grants and fellowships. Grants are nothing but advance money. Every grant that I got, I spent the money doing the execution of the project, and then I made the money on the back end either by resale of stock photos or a lot of times by lecturing and exhibition rentals. And then I do private teaching, mostly in New York City, and it used to be mostly in New York City because my daughter was in New Jersey. She just went to college in California, so now I got to start getting my business out in California. Those are my revenue streams. I'm not saying to copy those at all. It's not the point. The point is when somebody else stands up here and they say, I make $1 million as a photographer. First thing to say is, how do you make $1 million? And they'll say, oh, well, I used to have 2, but I lost half of it. So it doesn't do you any good. Those are my revenue streams. That's the question to ask somebody. What are all the things that they do? How much resale do they make? What do they teach? Et cetera, et cetera. That's how I make my living. These are the websites that I'll try to send you back to. Called thewellspoint.com, and it has podcasts on the craftsmanship of photography. I just did a podcast a couple months ago on the basics of histograms. If you're not comfortable with making good histograms, I suggest you look at it. I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback on that one. I have podcasts on creativity. I blog once a week. I have the resource list, which we're going to talk about. And so, just for example, this is the Grants and Fellowships page. We already talked about the Art Consultants and Corporate Fine Art Dealer page. Grant listings, Grants and Fellowships, grant listing databases, and then grant listing by state resources, just for example. So it's all broken down into subspecialty areas. This is, you all should be sitting on a postcard that's got a nice photo on that side and that there. This is an online critiquing business that I'm one of two founders of. We have 28 of the world's finest photographers, from Eli Reed to Bobby Lane, who will review your work online for money, called Photosynesi. That's what the card is there. And then my own site here, which is davidhwells.com. You got to have the H, or else you get a guy in Tennessee. And there's a workshops page. If you go there, you can see where I'm teaching next. And if you want to do this again, you can come take another class. And that is the URL for the PDF that I would strongly encourage you to write down, because I know I just talked unbelievably fast for an hour and 40 minutes, and I know you couldn't write it all down, so this is where you want to get it. So now I am here to take questions, and there was a question right here. I think there was a question there. Your question was about the time-lapse piece in the car driving from South Florida to North Florida.
Yeah.
I'm here. The question was, how did I do that time-lapse piece? I'm here. The passenger seat is over here. There's a headrest, which I pulled out, and where the headrest goes, there's a nice hole, and I jam my tripod in there, and then I put some weight to hold the tripod down, and then I turn on an intervalometer where it takes one picture every 4 seconds for 2 hours. Or not for 2 hours, for about 4 hours. That's how. So I wasn't actually reaching over there doing that. No, I'm driving, and every now and then I look over, but that's that one. The problem with the Gorilla Pod, as soon as you press against the wall, the legs splay out. That's why I like the tabletop tripods that I use. And what we're talking about in terms of that car was, if you imagine you pull the headrest out, there's the steel spine, and you stick this right into there, and then you put some extra weight to hold it down, and then you tighten it real tight, and the camera actually stayed still for 4 hours straight through.
Is that a Bogan?
This happens to be a Bogan Man photo, yes.
What was that called?
It's called an intervalometer. Interval-o-meter. And simply what it is there are many different versions of it, but you program them to take a picture every 2 seconds, every 4 seconds, every 8 hours, or whatever. And that's what I do. A lot of the time-lapse pieces you saw me are doing with the intervalometer. Like the baseball one was actually every 8 seconds over 2 hours. Sun arcs through the sky, sun comes straight in, and then the sun actually sets and the stadium goes dark, or the night lights come on.
Okay, the photo essays that you do.
Right.
Do you come up with the ideas and then pitch that idea to a magazine or other publication, or do they give you a theme that you go out and photograph?
Well, photo essays these days, it's a lot harder because the publication outlets that I used to depend on are much fewer and far between. So that's the downside. What I'm discovering in the Foreclosure Project is a good example, is sort of a more contemporary photo essay. I'm finding a lot of these other outlets, like the literary journals, and I'm talking to somebody about doing an exhibition of it in North Carolina, and they're going to pay me, and they're going to show it. So the short answer is that the first part of the problem is the outlets are many fewer. Having said that, for me personally, I'm more interested in finding a project that I care about so much that I'll get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, et cetera, et cetera. Having said that, if you do, in fact, can work with regular publications, they may also have ideas for you. But a typical photo essay, and the Times Magazine's a good example. When you see they have that thing now where they publish like a page and a half of photos every Sunday, most of those projects are still initiated by the photographers, because they're the kind of things that the photographers care about passionately, and they solve that how can I be different than the next guy problem, which is
What about the writing? Who does the writing?
it varies. With my stuff, I was really, really spoiled. With the Philadelphia Inquirer, they actually would have the writer write to me after the fact, and that is not the norm. Most of the time, there tend to be, National Geographic is the cliche of where it's completely driven by the writer, and the photographer then has to work in response to that. So I can't give you sort of a simple answer. It's a combination of what can you find in terms of an end user, and how can you distinguish yourself so they would hire you over the next guy.
Also, typically, how many photos would you shoot
Oh, that's another talk in the sense that there's so many variables about how many photos would you shoot for an essay. It's really hard to say. Like this foreclosure thing, if this thing goes the way I want, I wanted to photograph in 30 states. I mean, I'd love to do all 50, but I'm not going to get the money. But I think when I crack 30 states, I can say this is a nationwide project. Some photo essays are much smaller. I think a better answer would be when you start repeating yourself, where you're not making something new. That's when I would stop. Like with the pesticide thing, I reached a point where there wasn't anything new that I was doing. So then I stopped. Ditto on the Israeli-Palestinian. So far with the foreclosures, I haven't hit that point yet. When I did photo essays, how was the text provided? And the answer was some of them they would reuse the text that had been generated with the original source of the photo essay. Sometimes they would write new stuff. It sort of depended. Like the California magazine, because they were in California, they generated a new text. Some Self magazine used the old text.
So then you would have to work with whoever owned or.
Yes, one of the other issues about text is the ownership of text, just like in the ownership of photos. So yeah, then I have to work with them. And I'm happy to talk about photo essays. I feel a little bit like I want the point of the talk was a week in the life of a professional, and what I was trying to get you to think about, and I think all those things you do a week was a reminder that button pushing, as I call it, is probably the thing that I do the least. And so when I actually am out there photographing, like I was in this foreclosed house on Thursday, in a weird sort of way, I'm really enjoying it, even though it's grim, because I'm actually doing what I like to do versus going home that night and sitting down and doing the same thing I have to do. So what I'm trying to get at, and I'm happy to talk about the photo essays, is the point of showing you all of this stuff is to understand all of the things you need to be aware of if you're going to do it. If you're going to decide not to do it, you may have made a wise decision. If you're not sure, that's also good. But if you are going to do it, you need to really think this is just as serious as, I don't know, medical school or law school or whatever you did in your other life. This is going to take that same kind of time. It's not just taking pictures. It's not just snapping away. It's very hard work. I happen to be fairly good at it, pardon me, but that's a function of having a thick head and not many other options. The question was if somebody uses a photo differently than they intended. I mean, the short answer is in theory they do. The question is how serious are you about their pursuing them? But here's a more fundamental question: is if you don't register the work with Library of Congress, you don't have any hammer. I register every single photograph I made since 2001, when they started bulk registration, has been registered, including snaps, my daughter, everything. So if somebody misuses something, I got a hammer. So the answer to that is the stock agencies tend to manage that because that's how they make their money, but more importantly, they know that behind them is this, you know, when you open a DVD, it says the FBI will come get you and all that. I got that same hammer because I register my work. And so it hasn't become an issue yet, but like I said, I live for the day that it does because...
And how far do you allow them to crop?
Okay, one of the things about stock photography, how far do you allow them to crop? Karl Marx said the failure of capitalism will be the worker will become alienated from the product of his labors. Stock photography is the paragon of that. You have no control, none whatsoever. End of discussion. I don't even pay any attention to how it's used because I have no, it says right in the contract, they can do anything they want with it because that's what they're paying the money for. Please.
Do you have problems getting people to sign model releases?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you have problems getting people to sign model releases?
Do I have problems getting people to sign model releases? I don't use a lot of assistants. When I'm doing a big job, I'll hire assistants for one purpose only, two purposes, okay? My assistants do two things on big jobs. They keep people out of my face, and they get people to sign releases. Who do I typically hire for a person to help me, assist me on big jobs? I hate to say it, guys. A young, good-looking woman, because guys will sign model releases for women, and women will at least entertain signing model releases for women, but guys don't get model releases signed. It's a cold, hard reality. The whole talk has been about the reality. It's not about the meaning of life or any of that, though I try to put that in there. I've had pretty good luck getting model releases signed. A couple of things, I always show them the back of the camera. I always send people prints, because the next time you go to talk to them to get a model release, I don't want them thinking that I failed to send them a print. And so far I've had pretty good luck getting model releases. The assistant to speed up the process when I do a job is a big thing because it makes it a lot easier. The key to model releases, it's really simple. As soon as you get a model release signed, turn it over and write everything you can. Woman in black, red hair, red notebook, turquoise ring. If you don't put all that stuff on there, you will forget immediately. And there is now a couple apps out there where you snap somebody and then you immediately do that. You can do that as well. I have thousands and thousands of model releases, and they're reasonably well organized, but not brilliantly. Thank you. Oops, all right. Well, the technical contract law in this country is that they're supposed to get something of value, is the exact phrase. And to date, what has worked as of value is either $1 or actually a photograph. But you have to give something of value, because a model release is a contract between a photographer and a subject. And so the question is, do they get paid? The answer is that they should get something of value back. And so the other thing that I do besides writing all that information in the back is that I write on the same release. On February 14th, I sent that guy 2 4x6s and an 8x10, so I have a record of having actually given them something back of value, because that's part of the contractual relationship.
Early on in the presentation, you said you need to know multimedia, and I agree with you, but it's kind of a different animal than still photography. Can you talk a little bit about the minimum equipment you would need to accomplish these multimedia?
Well, the question was what the minimal equipment to accomplish multimedia, and I don't teach the classes in multimedia, so I'm going to sort of hesitate and hedge a little bit, except to say, again, what's your market? In the sense that in editorial, which is going to the web very fast, you need to be able to do closer to what I showed you. If you're doing portraits, wedding, family, you might look at Animoto, and the reason Animoto is doing so well, and I don't get paid by Animoto, I just think they've solved a problem, which is you've got a bunch of photos from a wedding or a family event, and you did 5 minutes of video, just DSLR video, simple video, and you want to slap it together to give them something. Probably the one thing that I would say, besides of course a DSLR, which shoots video, some kind of tripod, and 99% of my video is made on the tabletop tripod, not on the big tripod, microphone, serious audio. I actually use, 99% of my audio is made with, don't see it here, but I may be missing it. They make a little thing that slides in right here, and then I plug my Sennheiser shotgun microphone, which is a pretty expensive microphone, in here. It's on the bracket there. And it records very high quality audio, which then of course is perfectly lined up with the video. So I can use this to do perfectly good video. And a lot of times I'll do video, like the audio on the baseball thing was gathered from all these little video clips, 90% of which you don't see, but I got the audio and the video at the same time. And so probably the biggest single one would be a microphone. Because if you've got a DSLR that will do video and time lapse, you're 3/4 of the way there. One of the things about Olympus is that this will change format to 16:9. And so when I'm doing the time lapses at 16:9 proportion, those time lapses are matching perfectly in the format with my video. So I can go back and forth between stills, animations, and video easier rather than having the format jerk in and out like that. So that's another thing. But I would say probably first a microphone. And anybody who talks about multimedia will always say the thing that we don't get as photographers is sound. We're not as good at sound as we are at stills, and that's certainly what my experience has been as well.
Yeah, the audio for the video you made about the baseball,
Mm-hmm.
the announcer's voice was very clear, if I remember.
Mm-hmm.
It was very enjoyable, but I noticed the audio was very clear for the announcer's voice. How did you accomplish that?
With the Sennheiser shotgun microphone.
There was no crowd noise.
Well, and then walking up to, because at baseball stadium, if you think about it, there are some places how do you get good audio? Good audio is a little bit like good photographs in the sense of either a telephoto lens, which is what a shotgun microphone is, or walking, and that's a good example. In that case, I actually walked under the speaker, and I do about 5 minutes of that. And you only hear about 2 seconds of it. Audio is just like video in the fact you have to shoot 10 or 15 times as much of what you're going to use as compared to what you actually use. So I probably was standing under there for 2 or 3 minutes, even though I used 10 words from the guy. Please.
Have you ever done pro bono work in order to cultivate a niche, and then as you cultivated that niche and they got used to you, you try to switch them over to create an attitude? How do you do that?
Have I ever done pro bono work to try to get people to then hire me later for paying work?
Well, a specific niche that nobody has done, and you do this thing and to get your network established, and you're basically giving your stuff away. And at what point do you say enough? For photo credit. For photo credit, but then enough is enough, and now I want my money.
The question still is essentially the same, doing pro bono work to try to get into that market to then raise the prices. And the short answer, sadly, is that if you do it for free, they're going to continue to expect you to do it for free. So that's why I was saying the ancillary benefit trade-off. I mean, I do stuff for access. Like, I don't do real estate photography, though I'm doing a lot of real estate photography, because what most of the real estate agents want is they want me to go into another house that's in good shape and do 20 minutes of good interiors, and I'm happy to do that because they get something that's of great value to them, doesn't take a lot of time for me, and I get 3 hours in a real foreclosure, which I need. That's a real cost-benefit analysis. Doing stuff for free and hoping it's going to work, I'm afraid not, because you can't raise the price if they expect it for free, so I'm afraid so.
Well, we're thinking about becoming professional photographers.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought about becoming anything else?
Have I ever thought about doing something else? The one thing that I've thought about doing is, probably going to get in trouble for this. I love economics, believe it or not. I love reading economics because economics is not about money. Economics is about decision making. And so much of what we do on a daily basis in the political realm, the foreclosure crisis, all this stuff is fundamentally about how people make decisions, well informed or not. And so the more I read about economics, the more I think, oh, you know, maybe when I was 25, I should have gone to graduate school in economics, but otherwise, no. The only thing that I will say is a variation of that, and I do think it will be more useful, I hope, as an answer, is that I don't really think about doing economics, but I am continually changing what I do. I did newspaper work, then I did magazine work, then I did long-term documentary projects. I'm now doing a long-term project, but it's slightly different. I'm migrating into multimedia. I've got some ideas like everybody does for films. So I think if I was doing exactly the same thing that I did when I started out 25 years ago, you might have a good point. But for me, I'm continually evolving and continually challenging myself. So for me, it still stays interesting.
Sort of as the final media is changing, you're adapting to it as well.
Adapt or die, yes. And I am unfortunately going to have to wind up here because we're near 3 o'clock and I don't want to make you stay any longer than necessary. There are cards up here on Photosynesi. There's Olympus cameras up here if you want to look, and I will be here for a few minutes as well. Thank you very much for coming.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.